Somewhere beneath the streets of London, in basement archives where climate control hums at precisely 18 degrees Celsius, clay tablets rest in acid-free boxes. They've been waiting there for over a century, small rectangles of baked earth, each one covered with wedge-shaped impressions pressed into wet clay 5,000 years ago. These tablets speak of beings called the Anunnaki, gods who descended, divine council members who judge the fate of humanity, and according to some interpretations, entities who may have come to Earth, fleeing something vast and unknowable in the depths of space. Tonight we're going to read these tablets together. Hello and welcome. I'm genuinely glad you're here. Whether you've found your way to this story through curiosity about ancient Mesopotamia, through questions about alternative history, or simply because you needed something to carry you gently towards sleep, you've arrived at exactly the right place. There's no hurry ahead of us, only clay and starlight, and the slow unfolding of humanity's oldest written mysteries. Where are you settling in right now? Perhaps you're in bed, covers pulled close, the day's weight finally lifting from your shoulders. Maybe you're on a couch, or in a chair by a window where streetlights or stars offer their quiet company. Wherever you are, let that space hold you. The ancient Sumerians believed that certain places carried power, that temples and thresholds and riverbanks held special resonance. Your resting place tonight carries its own resonance. It's where questions can be wondered without needing answers, where mystery becomes comfort rather than anxiety. Take a breath, let your body remember what stillness feels like. The Anunnaki present us with one of archaeology's most fascinating interpretive divides. Mainstream Assyriology, the academic study of ancient Mesopotamian languages and cultures, understands these beings as mythological deities in a polytheistic religious system. The word itself likely derives from Sumerian terms meaning princely seed, or those of royal blood, describing the collective of gods who populated the Sumerian pantheon. Scholars like Thorkild Jacobson and Samuel Noah Kramer spent lifetimes translating these texts, finding in them creation myths, flood narratives, and theological frameworks not unlike those that would later appear in biblical tradition. But alternative interpretations see something else entirely. Writers like Zecharia Sitchin propose that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial visitors, beings from a planet called Nibiru, who came to Earth seeking gold and who genetically engineered humanity as a worker species. In this reading, the ancient tablets become historical records rather than mythology. The gods become astronauts, and certain passages hint at cosmic catastrophe, planetary displacement, beings fleeing conditions we can barely imagine. Which interpretation holds truth? That's not a question we need to settle tonight. What we can do is examine what the tablets actually say. We can hold both possibilities with equal wonder. We can let the mystery remain mysterious while still learning what 5,000 years of scholarship has revealed. If this journey serves you well, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel or leave a like. It helps others find their way to these stories, and it helps me keep creating them. Thank you for that small kindness. But before we can understand what the Sumerians wrote about the Anunnaki, we need to understand the world that shaped their writing. We need to travel back beyond the first cities, beyond the first temples, to a time when the land itself was still forming, when rivers carved their paths through ancient plains and the Persian Gulf was still a valley waiting to be flooded by rising seas. That forgotten world is where we're heading next. 20,000 years before the first cuneiform stylus pressed into wet clay, ice sheets 2 kilometers thick covered much, of northern Europe and North America. Sea levels stood 120 meters lower than today. The Persian Gulf didn't exist, not as water, anyway. Instead, a vast river valley stretched from the Zagros mountain foothills all the way to the Strait of Hormuz, carrying the combined flow of the Tigris and Euphrates across a landscape now drowned beneath shallow seas. Picture that valley in your mind. Not ocean, but savanna. Grasslands dotted with acacia trees and freshwater springs. Archaeological surveys using sonar have mapped ancient riverbeds beneath the Gulf's floor, revealing channels and tributaries that once supported life in what is now saltwater. Some researchers, including Jeffrey Rose of the University of Birmingham, have proposed that this Gulf oasis may have sheltered human populations during the harshest phases of the last ice age, a refuge that would eventually be swallowed by rising waters as the Pleistocene gave way to the Holocene. The flooding happened gradually, but in geological terms, it was remarkably swift. Between 14,000 and 6,000 BCE, melting glaciers sent pulses of water into the world's oceans. The Gulf Basin filled over millennia, pushing human settlements steadily northward, up onto the alluvial plains, where silt from mountain snowmelt created some of the most fertile soil on Earth. This is the land that would become Sumer. But it wasn't ready yet. The Tigris and Euphrates carried more than water. Each spring flood deposited fresh layers of mineral-rich sediment, particles of granite and limestone ground fine by their journey from Armenian highlands. Over thousands of years, these deposits built up the southern Mesopotamian plain, creating a landscape that was flat, marshy, and extraordinarily productive for anyone who could manage the water. The rivers also carried unpredictability. They flooded violently and changed course without warning, sometimes shifting their channels by dozens of kilometers within a single human lifetime. Climate. Records extracted from lake sediments and cave formations tell us that the period between 8,000 and 6,000 BCE brought warmer, wetter conditions to the region. Wild wheat and barley grew in the foothills to the north. Gazelle and onager roamed the grasslands. Date palms colonized the riverbanks, offering fruit that could be dried and stored. The land was preparing itself for something, though it held no awareness of what would come. No cities yet, no writing, no temples rising from mud brick platforms, just reed marshes where fish spawned in countless thousands, and migratory birds darkened autumn skies, and the stars wheeled overhead in patterns that humans had been watching since before they were fully human. Somewhere in those marshes, small groups of people were learning to stay in one place. They were building huts from bundled reeds. They were catching fish in woven traps and gathering the wild grains that grew along seasonal waterways. The Anunnaki, as yet, had no names. The clay that would carry their stories still lay beneath river water, waiting to be gathered, shaped, and inscribed. Long before anyone carved the name Anunnaki into clay, fishing communities had already lived along these waterways for thousands of years. Archaeologists call them the Ubaid people, after Tel el-Ubaid, a modest mound in southern Iraq where British excavators first uncovered their distinctive painted pottery in 1919. The Ubaid culture flourished from roughly 6,500 to 3,800 BCE, spreading gradually from southern Mesopotamia northward and along the Gulf Coast, leaving behind evidence of a remarkably sophisticated way of life. Their villages clustered where freshwater met marsh. Houses of packed mud and bundled reeds housed extended families. Excavations at sites like Eridu which the Sumerians themselves would later call the world's first city, reveal temples built and rebuilt on the same sacred spot for over 1,000 years. The earliest level, dated to around 5,400 BCE, contained a simple room barely 3 meters square, with a niche for offerings and traces of fish bones scattered near what may have been an altar. Fish as sacrifice, fish as sustenance, fish as connection between human and divine. The Ubaid people crafted elegant pottery with geometric designs in dark paint on buff-colored clay. They fashioned clay figurines with elongated heads and coffee bean eyes, strange, almost reptilian features that some alternative researchers have seized upon as evidence of non-human contact. Mainstream archaeology interprets these figures as representations of deities or ancestors, their exaggerated features following artistic conventions rather than depicting actual beings. Both interpretations acknowledge the same artifacts. They simply read them differently. Here is where the mystery deepens. Somewhere between the Ubaid period and the emergence of what we recognize as Sumerian civilization around 3,500 BCE, a new population appears in the archaeological record. They called themselves Sagigga, the black-headed people. Their language, Sumerian, connects to no other known language family on Earth. Not Semitic, like the Akkadian that would later replace it. Not Indo-European, not Dravidian or Kartvelian, or any other linguistic group scholars have proposed. Sumerian stands alone, an isolate, its origins as mysterious as the civilization that spoke it. Where did they come from? The question has occupied linguists and archaeologists for over a century. Some have proposed migration from the Indus Valley. Others suggest Central Asian origins, or connections to languages of the Caucasus. None of these theories has gained consensus. The Sumerians themselves offered their own answer. Kingship descended from heaven. Civilization was a gift from the gods. The arts of building, writing, agriculture, and law arrived fully formed from divine sources. Perhaps this was theological metaphor. Perhaps it preserved genuine memory of knowledge, received from elsewhere. Or perhaps, and this possibility deserves consideration, it simply reflected how any civilization might experience the slow accumulation of innovation across generations, compressing centuries of gradual development into mythic narratives of sudden divine gift. The black-headed people settled in the southern marshlands. They began building temples of increasingly ambitious scale. They developed the first writing system humanity would ever create. And on those earliest tablets, they began recording the names of their gods. Before there were words, there were tokens. Small clay objects shaped like cones, spheres, and cylinders, some no larger than a fingernail, served as counting devices in ancient Mesopotamian villages as early as 8,000 BCE. A cone might represent a small measure of grain. A sphere could stand for a larger quantity. Archaeologist Denise Schmant-Besserat spent decades tracing how these humble accounting tools evolved over 5 millennia into the most consequential invention in human history. The breakthrough came around 3,300 BCE in the city of Uruk. Administrators there began pressing tokens into wet clay to create permanent records, then realized they could achieve the same result more efficiently by drawing the token shapes with a reed stylus. Pictographs emerged, simplified images of the objects being counted. A head meant head. Grain stalks meant barley. The symbols carried meaning but not sound. Then something remarkable happened. Scribes began using pictographs to represent not objects but syllables. The Sumerian word for arrow was tai. The word for life was also Tai. By drawing an arrow, a scribe could now write an abstract concept, life, that had no physical form to depict. This rebus principle transformed record-keeping into true writing. Ideas that existed only in the mind could finally be fixed in matter. The reed stylus left wedge-shaped impressions in clay. Scholars call this script cuneiform, from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge. Over centuries, the pictographs grew increasingly abstract, their original forms unrecognizable beneath layers of stylistic evolution. By 2500 BCE, cuneiform could express anything the Sumerian language could say. Poetry, law, prayer, mythology, love, grief, and the names of beings who existed before the world began. Scribal schools called eduba, tablet houses, trained young men in the painstaking art. Students practiced by copying texts over and over, baking successful tablets and recycling failures back into raw clay. A complete scribal education took years. Graduates became priests, administrators, and keepers of sacred knowledge. They preserved stories that were already ancient in their own time, copying hymns and myths from worn originals onto fresh clay for future generations. Then Sumerian civilization ended. The language died as a spoken tongue by 1800 BCE, replaced by Akkadian and later Babylonian. Cuneiform continued for another 18 centuries before it too fell silent. The last known cuneiform tablet dates to 75 CE. After that, nothing. The script became indecipherable, its meaning locked away. For nearly 2,000 years, the tablets waited. The key arrived in 1835, when British officer Henry Rawlinson began copying inscriptions carved into a cliff face at Behistun in modern Iran. The text appeared in 3 scripts: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian cuneiform. Working like code breakers, scholars used the known Persian to crack the unknown cuneiform. Within decades, they could read Babylonian. By the early 20th century, Sumerian itself began yielding its secrets. The tablets spoke again, and among the first words recovered were stories of the Anunnaki, the great gods who had shaped the world and everything in it. In 1850, the sands of southern Iraq still concealed entire cities. British and French archaeologists had begun excavating the great Assyrian palaces of the Al-Futim north, Nineveh, Nimrud, Khorsabad, uncovering colossal winged bulls and thousands of cuneiform tablets. But the older Sumerian heartland remained largely untouched, its tells rising like gentle hills above the flat alluvial plain, their contents unknown. Nippur changed everything. Located roughly 160 kilometers south of modern Baghdad, Nippur had been the spiritual center of Sumerian civilization, home to the Ekur, the temple of Enlil, chief among the gods. The University of Pennsylvania launched excavations there in 1889, continuing intermittently for decades. Beneath layers of sand and collapsed mud brick, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary: a scribal quarter containing over 30,000 cuneiform tablets and fragments. Many dated to the Old Babylonian period, around 1800 BCE, but they contained copies of texts far older, hymns, myths, and religious compositions stretching back to the 3rd millennium. The tablets arrived in Philadelphia wrapped in cotton, packed in wooden crates covered in the dust of 4 millennia. Meanwhile, British excavator Leonard Woolley was digging at Ur, the city that the Bible names as Abraham's birthplace. Between 1922 and 1934, Woolley revealed the royal cemetery with its stunning grave goods: gold headdresses, lapis lazuli jewelry, and evidence of mass human sacrifice accompanying royal burials. He also uncovered residential quarters, temple complexes, and administrative archives that painted an intimate picture of Sumerian urban life around 2600 BCE. Assembling coherent narratives from these finds required patience bordering on obsession. Tablets rarely survived intact. Edges crumbled, surfaces flaked. A single mythological text might exist only in fragments scattered across multiple collections. 3 lines in Philadelphia, 2 in London, 6 in Istanbul. A crucial middle section lost entirely. Scholars like Samuel Noah Kramer spent careers piecing these puzzles together, traveling between museums with notebooks full of hand-copied signs, recognizing that a fragment in Berlin joined with a piece in Baghdad. Consider what this labor revealed. Kramer eventually reconstructed over 20 Sumerian literary compositions, publishing translations with titles that still echo through scholarship. The Descent of Inanna to the Netherworld, Gilgamesh and the Land of the Living, The Creation of the Pickaxe. Each translation opened windows into a mind world utterly unlike our own, yet recognizably human in its concerns. Death, meaning, divine justice, the proper relationship between mortals and gods. The wonder these early scholars felt permeates their writings. Here were voices from before the pyramids, describing floods and creation, and beings called Anunnaki, who determined the fates of humanity. The tablets offered not dry administrative records, but poetry, theology, and mythology of startling sophistication. These were not primitive people groping toward civilization. They had already arrived, and they were telling stories about beings greater than themselves. In those stories, the Anunnaki appeared again and again. It was time to understand who they actually were. The word itself deserves careful attention. In Sumerian cuneiform, the Anunnaki appear as Anunna or Anunnakene, a term scholars have translated variously as princely seed, those of noble blood, or offspring of Anu. The etymology points toward divine royalty rather than extraterrestrial origin. Anu was the sky god, the distant father figure at the apex of the Sumerian pantheon. His children and descendants, the Anunnaki, formed the collective body of divine beings who governed cosmic and earthly affairs. Let that settle for a moment. The texts themselves, in their original context, describe a family of gods. The Anunnaki appear most prominently in creation narratives, flood accounts, and scenes depicting the divine assembly. In the Atra-Hasis Epic, a Babylonian composition drawing on older Sumerian traditions, the Anunnaki are the senior gods who impose labor upon the Igigi, a younger class of deities. When the Igigi rebel against their toil, the Anunnaki approve the creation of humanity to take over the work. The text states this plainly. Humans were fashioned from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god, created specifically to bear the burden of the gods so divine beings could rest. Let him bear the yoke assigned by Enlil, the text reads. Let man carry the toil of the gods. In the Sumerian king list, a document combining mythological and historical rulers, the Anunnaki do not appear directly, but their influence permeates the text's framework. Kingship descends from heaven. The first cities arise under divine sanction. Rulers govern as stewards of the gods, their authority flowing downward from cosmic sources. Flood narratives present the Anunnaki as members of the divine council, deliberating humanity's fate. In the Gilgamesh Epic's flood account, the gods grow disturbed by human noise and overpopulation. They decide to send catastrophic waters. Yet the god Enki, also called Ea, circumvents the council's decree by warning a single righteous man, Utnapishtim, to build a vessel and preserve life. When the flood ends and the survivor offers sacrifice, the gods gather like flies over the offering. The Anunnaki are present at this gathering, described as weeping over the destruction they themselves authorized. These are not distant cosmic administrators. They regret, they quarrel, they reverse decisions. Other texts place the Anunnaki in the underworld, where they serve as judges of the dead. When the goddess Inanna descends through 7 gates to the land of no return, she ultimately faces the Anunnaki seated in judgment. Their verdict sends her to death, a death from which she must be rescued through divine intervention and substitution. Here is what the texts actually say. The Anunnaki were powerful, numerous, and involved in both cosmic governance and human affairs. They created humanity for labor. They debated destroying their creation. They judged the dead and decreed the fates. What the texts do not say, at least not explicitly, is where these beings came from, or why they arrived on Earth, or whether they fled some greater catastrophe among the stars. Those questions require interpretation, and interpretation is where scholarly paths diverge. Imagine a council chamber that exists beyond physical space, a gathering place where decisions ripple outward into storms and harvests, births and deaths, the rise and fall of cities. The Sumerians called this assembly the Ubshu-Ukina, and they believed it convened in Nippur, at the temple of Enlil, where heaven's authority touched earthly ground. Here the great gods met to determine destinies. Here the Anunnaki received their place in cosmic hierarchy. At the summit stood Anu, the Sky Father. His name means simply heaven, remote and seldom intervening. Directly, Anu represented ultimate authority, the source from which divine kingship flowed downward like water from mountain springs. Cuneiform texts rarely depict Anu acting. Instead, he authorizes, sanctions, confirms. His power lies in legitimacy rather than action. The sky watches, and its watching matters. Enlil held executive authority. Lord of the wind and breath, master of the tablet of destinies, Enlil translated Anu's distant sovereignty into operational command. When the gods decided to send the flood, Enlil made it happen. When humanity grew too loud and numerous, Enlil complained. His temple at Nippur, the Ikur, mountain house, served as the cosmic axis connecting heaven, earth, and underworld. Pilgrims traveled from across Mesopotamia to seek his favor. Then there was Enki, called Ea in Akkadian texts. God of fresh waters, wisdom, magic, and craft, Enki represented divine intelligence applied to practical problems. Where Enlil commanded, Enki created. He designed the first humans from clay. He taught civilizations arts, writing, agriculture, medicine, the brewing of beer. When other gods sought humanity's destruction, Enki found loopholes, whispered warnings, preserved what deserved preserving. These 3 formed the highest tier. Below them ranked dozens of other deities. Nana, the moon god, Utu, the sun, Inanna, the goddess of love and war, Ninhursag, the mother goddess, and many others whose names fill the offering lists of temple archives. Together with the great gods, they comprised the Anunnaki, the assembly of divine powers governing every aspect of existence. Beneath them, or perhaps parallel to them, the Igigi served as a lesser class of deities. Some texts number the Anunnaki at 50, the Igigi at 300. Other sources blur these distinctions. What remains consistent is hierarchy. The Anunnaki hold senior authority. They judge, they decree, they determine. Where does humanity fit? The Sumerians understood themselves as servants created for labor, but not slaves without value. Humans built the temples where gods received nourishment through sacrifice. Humans sang the hymns that sustained divine presence. The relationship was reciprocal, if unequal. Gods needed worship. Humans needed divine favor for rain, fertility, protection from chaos. This cosmology placed humanity precisely between divine and animal, capable of receiving instruction from above, responsible for maintaining cosmic order through ritual observance. Take a slow breath here. Feel how this ancient understanding still echoes. The sense that powers greater than ourselves shape events beyond our control, yet somehow remain accessible through proper attention. The Anunnaki watched, they judged, and in the city of Eridu, where the first temple rose from marshland, their presence had been honored since before memory began. 12 kilometers southwest of the ancient city of Ur, a mound called Tel Abu Shahrain rises from the flat Iraqi plain. Wind-scoured and largely unvisited today, this modest hill holds something extraordinary beneath its surface. 19 successive temples built one atop another across 3,000 years, each honoring the same sacred spot, each dedicated to the same god. This is Eridu, and the Sumerians believed it was where civilization itself began. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. So opens the Sumerian king list, a document composed around 2100 BCE that traces royal authority from mythological origins through historical dynasties. The claim is theological rather than administrative, a statement about divine sanction rather than municipal planning. Yet archaeology confirms that Eridu does represent one of humanity's earliest urban experiments. Excavations conducted by Fuad Safar and Seton Lloyd between 1946 and 1949 revealed occupation layers stretching back to approximately 5,400 BCE, making Eridu contemporary with the earliest Ubaid settlements anywhere in southern Mesopotamia. The first temple, designated level 18 by archaeologists, measured barely 4 meters square. A simple room with a niche for offerings, a pedestal that may have held a divine image, and fish bones scattered across the floor, perhaps remnants of sacrificial meals presented to an unnamed deity. Above this humble structure, succeeding generations built larger and more elaborate versions. Level 11, dated around 4,500 BCE, featured mud brick platforms and external buttresses. By level 7, the temple had become monumental, its foundations sunk deep into accumulated debris of earlier sacred architecture. Enki claimed this ground, god of the Abzu, the freshwater abyss believed to lie beneath the earth. Enki ruled from Eridu's temple through millennia of Sumerian civilization. The marshes surrounding the ancient city provided tangible connection to his watery domain. Springs bubbling up through soil seemed to confirm the subterranean ocean's presence. Date. Palms and reed beds flourished in this liminal landscape where fresh water met brackish lagoon. Cuneiform texts describe Enki's temple as filled with wonders. The House of the Water Deep contained fish-filled pools within its sacred precincts. Lapis lazuli and gold adorned its shrines. Priests performed rituals of purification, using waters drawn from sources consecrated by the god's presence. Here is where mythology and archaeology interweave most tightly. The Sumerian claimed their civilization arrived complete from divine sources. Yet the excavated record shows gradual development, each temple larger than the last, techniques improving across centuries. Both truths can coexist. Human communities built these structures with human hands. Yet they experienced their growing capabilities as gifts from powers beyond themselves. At Eridu, the Anunnaki first touched Earth according to sacred tradition. Here, Enki established his residence among mortals. Here, the covenant between gods and humanity took physical form in mud brick and offering. The marshes have long since dried. The temples lie buried beneath sand and collapsed walls. But for 3,000 years, pilgrims knew this place as the point where heaven's authority first descended into human keeping. Eastward across the waters, where the sun emerged each morning from its nightly journey through the underworld, the Sumerians imagined a land untouched by death. They called it Dilmun, the pure place, the clean place, the land where the sun rises. In this blessed realm, no lion killed, no wolf snatched lambs, no illness weakened the body. The old did not say, "I am old." The sick did not say, "I am sick." Dilmun existed outside ordinary time, preserved in primordial perfection. The myth of Enki and Ninhursag, preserved on tablets from Nippur, dating to around 1900 BCE, describes this paradise in remarkable detail. Fresh water springs from the earth at Enki's command, transforming barren ground into gardens. 8. Sacred plants grow in succession, each possessing divine properties. The mother goddess Ninhursag tends this sanctuary where creation proceeds without pain or struggle, a template of existence before suffering entered the world. Modern scholars generally identify Dilmun with the island of Bahrain and the adjacent Arabian coastline. Archaeological evidence supports extensive trade between Mesopotamia and this region during the 3rd millennium BCE. Dilmun merchants appear in cuneiform commercial records, exporting copper, pearls, and exotic goods. The historical Dilmun was real, a prosperous trading hub controlling maritime routes through the Persian Gulf. But the mythological Dilmun transcended geography. It represented a state of being rather than a location on maps. The Anunnaki themselves possessed access to this condition of immortality, this exemption from decay that separated divine existence from human fate. When Ziusudra, the Sumerian Noah, survived the Great Flood, the gods granted him eternal life in Dilmun as reward for his obedience. He crossed from mortal into immortal, taking up residence where death held no dominion. Sumerian cosmology divided existence into multiple realms. An, heaven, arched above as the domain of the sky god. Ki, earth, spread beneath as humanity's dwelling. Kur, the underworld, lay below as the land of the dead. Between and beyond these structured zones, places like Dilmun existed as thresholds, neither fully earthly nor entirely celestial, accessible to gods and exceptional mortals alike. The garden imagery persists through later traditions. Eden's paradise, Elysian fields, the Persian concept of paradisa, from which our word paradise derives. Each echoes these Sumerian precedents: a walled garden, abundant water, freedom from toil and mortality. The pattern repeats across cultures separated by centuries and thousands of kilometers. Perhaps such visions arise independently from universal human longing. Perhaps they spread through trade routes and cultural contact. Perhaps, as some alternative researchers suggest, they preserve genuine memory of conditions experienced before some great catastrophe altered human existence. The texts themselves offer no definitive answer. They simply describe what the gods possessed and humans lacked: a home beyond corruption, a garden where time itself grew gentle. Above Dilmun, the stars wheeled in patterns the Sumerians watched with keen attention. The Anunnaki dwelt in those celestial heights as well, their movements tracked by priests who understood the sky as a tablet inscribed with divine intention. The gods grew tired. This is where the story begins, not with cosmic love or benevolent design, but with divine exhaustion. The Atra-Hasis Epic, preserved on old Babylonian tablets dating to approximately 1700 BCE, but drawing on far older Sumerian traditions, describes a universe where the Igigi, the younger gods, labored endlessly to maintain irrigation, channels, and cultivate fields for the Anunnaki. After 3,600 years of toil, they rebelled. Excessive is the drudgery. Our work is too hard, the Igigi proclaimed. They burned their tools. They surrounded Enlil's dwelling by night. The great gods awoke to crisis. A labor strike among divine beings. Something had to change. Enki proposed a solution: create a substitute worker, fashion a new being to bear the burden. Let the gods rest, while another species digs the canals and bakes the bread. The mother goddess Nintu, also called Ninhursag, Mami, Belet Ili, performed the actual creation. Clay from the earth provided substance. But clay alone could not produce a living, thinking creature capable of understanding divine commands. The recipe required something more: the blood of a slaughtered god. The text names him Wi-Ilu, a deity who had intelligence. His flesh and blood mixed with clay. His spirit infused the new creation with consciousness. Let there be a spirit from the gods. Flesh, Nintu declared. Let it proclaim living man as its sign. 14 pieces of clay became 14 first humans, 7 male, 7 female. They emerged from the womb of creation, already capable of labor, already understanding their purpose. The gods could finally rest. Pause with this a moment. The Sumerian answer to "why do we exist" was stark and functional. Humanity was created to work so that gods could be free. Yet this pragmatic origin carried deeper implications. Humans contained divine essence. The blood of an intelligent god ran through mortal veins. Consciousness itself was a divine gift, however accidentally bestowed. Alternative interpretations, particularly those advanced by Zecharia Sitchin, read these creation accounts as records of genetic engineering. In this framework, the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings who manipulated early hominid DNA to produce Homo sapiens as a worker species. The blood of a god becomes genetic material. The mixing with clay represents manipulation of earthly biology. The sudden appearance of modern humans in the archaeological record, contested among paleoanthropologists, finds explanation in deliberate intervention. Mainstream scholarship views such readings as fundamentally misunderstanding how mythology functions. Creation accounts across cultures employ symbolic language to address existential questions. The clay represents human mortality and connection to earth. Divine blood represents consciousness, language, the mysterious capacities separating humans from animals. The story explains present conditions, human labor, divine worship, through narrative origin. Both readings confront the same ancient text. Both seek meaning in cuneiform wedges pressed into clay nearly 4 millennia ago. The tablets themselves remain silent on which interpretation their authors intended. What survives is the image, gods shaping clay, breathing intelligence into mud, creating beings capable of wondering about their own creation. Water remembers what stone forgets. Across southern Mesopotamia, geological surveys have revealed flood deposits, layers of sterile silt interrupting occupation debris at sites like Ur, Kish, Shuruppak, and Uruk. These deposits date to different periods, suggesting not one catastrophic deluge, but multiple severe inundations across millennia. Rivers that gave life could also take it. The Tigris and Euphrates, swollen by Armenian snowmelt, regularly burst their banks with devastating force. From this landscape of periodic catastrophe emerged humanity's most enduring survival narrative. The Sumerian version names the hero Ziusudra, life of long days, a pious king of Shuruppak who receives divine warning of impending destruction. Only fragments survive, perhaps 300 lines from what was once a longer composition. We know the gods decreed humanity's annihilation. We know one god dissented. We know Ziusudra built a vessel, endured 7 days and 7 nights of storm, and emerged to offer sacrifice as the waters receded. The Akkadian Atra-Hasis Epic, more complete at roughly 1,200 lines, provides crucial context. Humanity had multiplied beyond divine tolerance. Their noise disturbed Enlil's sleep. The chief executive of heaven, exhausted by human clamor, persuaded the divine assembly to send plague, then drought, then finally the flood. Each time, Enki circumvented the decree by teaching Atra-Hasis countermeasures. When the final destruction approached, Enki whispered through a reed wall, technically not violating his oath to keep the decision secret, warning his devotee to dismantle his house and build a boat. "Wall, wall, listen to me," the text records. Reed wall, attend to my words." The Gilgamesh epic preserves the fullest flood account, told by the survivor himself, now called Utnapishtim, to the wandering king who seeks immortality. The storm lasted 6 days and 7 nights. All the windstorms, exceedingly powerful, attacked as one. Seas rose over mountains. When stillness finally came, Utnapishtim opened a hatch and wept, seeing only water in all directions. His vessel grounded on Mount Nemush. He released a dove, a swallow, a raven. The raven did not return. The Anunnaki appear in these accounts as members of the deciding council. They authorized destruction. Yet when the waters actually rose, the goddess Ishtar cried out, "How could I speak evil in the assembly of the gods, ordering catastrophe to destroy my people?" The Anunnaki crouched like dogs against the outer wall of heaven, weeping at what they had unleashed. Divine regret, cosmic second-guessing. The texts portray gods capable of terrible decisions and genuine remorse. British archaeologist Leonard Woolley, excavating in the 1920s, discovered an 8-foot layer of water-deposited silt separating earlier and later occupation levels. He believed he had found evidence of the biblical flood. Later analysis suggested this was a local, not universal, inundation. Yet the experience of catastrophic flooding was undeniably real for ancient Mesopotamians. Memory preserved what measurement could not. The story survived because it spoke truth, if not literal, then essential. Waters rise, most perish. A few, warned by wisdom, build vessels and endure. She set her heart on the great below. With these words, one of humanity's oldest recorded narratives begins. A journey into death undertaken not by accident or defeat, but by deliberate choice. Inanna, Queen of Heaven, goddess of love and war and the morning star, decided to enter the realm from which no traveler returns. The tablets preserving her descent date to approximately 1900 BCE, though the story itself reaches back centuries earlier into oral tradition. Why she went remains mysterious. The text offers no clear motivation. Perhaps she sought to extend her power into the underworld, ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. Perhaps she wished to attend the funeral rites of Gugalana, the Bull of Heaven. Perhaps, as some scholars suggest, The narrative encodes seasonal cycles, the disappearance and return of Venus as evening and morning star, absent from the sky for periods during its orbital dance with the sun. The journey required passage through 7 gates. At each threshold, the gatekeeper demanded Inanna surrender one element of her divine regalia: her crown at the first gate, her lapis lazuli measuring rod at the second, her double strand of beads at the third. Garment by garment, symbol by symbol, power was stripped away until the Queen of Heaven stood naked and defenseless before her sister's throne. The Anunnaki of the underworld sat in judgment. 7 judges, 7 pronouncements, 7 condemnations. They fastened upon Inanna the eyes of death. They struck her with the word of wrath. Her corpse hung from a hook like a slab of rotting meat. 3 days passed, 3 nights. Above, Inanna's faithful servant, Ninshubur, followed her mistress's instructions, pleading with the great gods for intervention. Enlil refused. Nanna refused. Only Enki, god of wisdom and craft, devised a solution. From the dirt beneath his fingernails, he fashioned 2 small beings, neither male nor female, and sent them slipping through the cracks into the underworld. They found Ereshkigal in the throes of lamentation, crying out in pain. They echoed her suffering with compassion. Moved by their sympathy, she offered a gift. They asked for the corpse on the hook. Inanna rose. But the underworld demands balance. No one leaves without providing a substitute. Demons followed the revived goddess back to the surface, seeking someone to take her place. She passed her servant, loyal Ninshubur, and refused to surrender her. She passed her sons, dressed in mourning, and refused. Then she found her husband Dumuzi, dressed in splendid garments, sitting on her throne, apparently untouched by grief. "Take him," Inanna declared. Death, descent, resurrection, substitution. The cycle turns on itself. Dumuzi would spend half each year in the underworld, his sister taking his place for the remaining months. Seasons themselves, the dying and returning of vegetation, found explanation in divine suffering. Breathe slowly here. Feel how ancient this pattern is. Something must die for something else to live. The Sumerians understood this 4,000 years before we drew breath. The Anunnaki witnessed, the Anunnaki judged, and existence continued, balanced between darkness and light. On clear nights above the Mesopotamian plain, the sky revealed itself with startling clarity. No light pollution dimmed the stars. No haze from industrial emissions obscured the planetary wanderers, tracing their paths through fixed constellations. Sumerian priests watched this celestial display with systematic attention, recording observations on clay tablets that would eventually revolutionize human understanding of cosmic order. They identified 5 visible planets and tracked their movements across decades. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, each received divine association and careful documentation. Venus, embodiment of Inanna, drew particular scrutiny. The so-called Venus tablet of Ammisaduqa, dating to approximately 1650 BCE, records the planet's appearances and disappearances over a 21-year period. Rising times, setting times, intervals of invisibility, all noted with precision that modern astronomers have used to anchor ancient chronology. Mathematics enabled this precision. The Sumerians developed a base 60 numerical system that survives in our 60-second minutes and 60-minute hours, our 360-degree circles. They understood place value notation centuries before other cultures. Tablets from Nippur demonstrate calculation of square roots, quadratic equations, and geometric relationships. This mathematical sophistication served practical purposes: surveying fields, calculating grain storage, managing irrigation. But it also served celestial observation. The zodiac itself emerged from Mesopotamian sky watching. By the first millennium BCE, Babylonian astronomers had formalized the 12 constellations marking the sun's annual path. Earlier Sumerian star catalogs, like the 3 stars each tablets from around 1200 BCE, organized the heavens into 3 bands associated with the gods Anu, Enlil, and Ea. Each month, certain stars rose as others set. The patterns repeated yearly, providing agricultural calendars and ritual schedules. Here is where careful distinction becomes essential. The Sumerians possessed genuine astronomical knowledge, impressive, systematic, foundational to later Greek and Islamic astronomy. What they did not possess, according to surviving textual evidence, was knowledge of planets beyond Saturn's visibility. No cuneiform tablet mentions Uranus, Neptune, or a 12th planet called Nibiru in contexts suggesting observational awareness of outer solar system bodies. Zechariah Sitchin's claims rest partly on his interpretation of cylinder seal 5A 243, housed in Berlin's Vorderasiatisches Museum. The seal depicts a star surrounded by 11 smaller bodies, which Sitchin identified as the Sun orbited by 11 planets, including Earth and the hypothetical Nibiru. Mainstream scholars, including cylinder seal specialist Michael Heiser, have challenged this reading extensively. The central star lacks the standard iconography for the sun god Shamash. The planets more likely represent other stars or decorative elements consistent with contemporary artistic conventions. The Sumerians watched the heavens with remarkable dedication. They built ziggurats whose orientations aligned with celestial events. They developed mathematics capable of predicting lunar eclipses. They associated their gods with planetary bodies in ways that shaped astrology for millennia. What they did not leave behind, at least in any tablet yet translated, is evidence of knowledge impossible without telescopes or extraterrestrial informants. The stars kept their own counsel then. They keep it still, wheeling overhead as they did when priests first pressed reed into clay. In 1976, a book called The 12th Planet proposed a radical rereading of Sumerian civilization. Its author, Zechariah Sitchin, had studied economics and journalism in London before pursuing independent research into ancient Mesopotamian texts. His conclusion would captivate millions. The Anunnaki were not mythological deities, but flesh and blood extraterrestrials from a planet called Nibiru, visitors who genetically engineered humanity as a slave species to mine gold for their dying world's atmosphere. The theory deserves examination on its own terms before critique. Sitchin proposed that Nibiru follows a 3,600-year elliptical orbit, periodically bringing it close to Earth. Each return allowed the Anunnaki to check on their terrestrial operations. The Sumerian word shar, meaning 3,600 in the mathematical system, became, in Sitchin's reading, evidence of this orbital period. The creation of humanity from clay and divine blood became genetic manipulation, combining Anunnaki DNA with that of Homo erectus. The gods who descended from heaven became astronauts landing spacecraft. Certain elements of Sitchin's framework echo genuine textual content. The Sumerians did describe gods descending. They did credit divine beings with creating humanity. They did associate certain gods with celestial bodies. These parallels explain the theory's appeal. It builds on authentic ancient imagery while reinterpreting its meaning entirely. scholarly response has been extensive and largely dismissive. Assyriologist Michael Heiser, who earned his doctorate in Hebrew Bible and Semitic languages from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, dedicated years to examining Sitchin's translations, word by word. His conclusion: fundamental errors pervade the linguistic analysis. The Sumerian term Nibiru appears in astronomical texts referring to Jupiter or Mercury in different contexts, not an undiscovered planet. The word Shem, which Sitchin translated as rocket ship, consistently means name or renown in standard lexicons. The cylinder seal depicting 11 bodies around a star cannot bear the interpretive weight Sitchin placed upon it. Beyond translation disputes lie methodological concerns. Sitchin worked outside peer review, publishing through trade presses rather than academic journals. His references to primary sources often proved difficult to verify. When scholars attempted to locate tablets, he cited, some appeared not to exist as described. Yet dismissal alone misses something important. Millions of readers found in Sitchin's work a framework that satisfied deep longings for cosmic significance, for explanations of human consciousness, for evidence that we are not alone. The theory offers meaning. Humanity was deliberately created. Our existence matters to beings beyond Earth. Our struggles connect to larger cosmic narratives. Perhaps this hunger for significance explains the persistence of ancient astronaut theories, despite scholarly rejection. The alternative is harder to accept, that we emerged through blind evolutionary processes on an unremarkable planet, that consciousness arose accidentally, that the Sumerians created beautiful mythologies reflecting human imagination rather than extraterrestrial history. Both possibilities humble us differently. One makes us cosmic participants. The other makes us cosmic accidents who learn to wonder. The tablets themselves remain silent, on which humility is warranted. They offer only what they offer, wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay, waiting for interpretation. The question haunts the margins of these ancient texts. If the Anunnaki came from elsewhere, whether from celestial realms above or distant planetary systems, what propelled their arrival? Were they colonizers seeking resources, as Sitchin proposed? Were they refugees from some cosmic catastrophe? Or does the very question impose modern frameworks onto narratives that never intended to address extraterrestrial migration? Certain textual fragments invite speculation. The Sumerian poem, Enki and the World Order, describes the god establishing civilization after what appears to be a period of primordial chaos. Waters needed organizing. Boundaries required setting. The implication suggests a world in disarray before divine intervention, though whether this reflects cosmic disaster or simply creation, mythology's standard tropes remains unclear. The Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish opens with Tiamat, goddess of salt water, and Apsu, god of fresh water, mingling before any gods existed. From their union emerged successive generations of deities whose conflicts eventually produced the ordered cosmos. Violence preceded stability. Chaos preceded form. These narratives parallel creation accounts worldwide. Norse mythology describes the primordial void, Ginnungagap, from which the first being emerged. Egyptian cosmology posits the waters of Nun existing before the first sunrise. Greek tradition speaks of chaos preceding Gaia and Eros. The pattern suggests less a shared memory of specific catastrophe than a common human intuition. Order arises from disorder, cosmos from chaos, meaning from meaninglessness. Anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss argued that myths resolve fundamental contradictions in human experience. The problem of origins, how something came from nothing, how order emerged from chaos, finds symbolic resolution through narratives of divine arrival and creative action. Gods coming from elsewhere provide satisfying explanation without requiring further explanation. The arrival itself becomes the starting point, the foundational axiom that needs no proof. Some alternative researchers point to widespread flood narratives as evidence of shared, catastrophic memory, perhaps a global disaster that scattered survivors and spawned mythology across separated cultures. Geological evidence confirms significant flooding events at the end of the last ice age, when glacial melt raised sea levels dramatically. The Persian Gulf Basin flooded. Coastal regions worldwide submerged. Human populations certainly experienced devastating inundation. Whether these experiences could survive as coherent memory across 10,000 years of oral transmission remains debated. Memory studies suggest that accurate historical detail degrades within generations, leaving only emotional cores. Water rising, few surviving, rebuilding afterward. The specifics shift while the pattern persists. Perhaps the Anunnaki represent something psychologically rather than historically true. Divine beings arriving from beyond may symbolize consciousness itself, that mysterious emergence of awareness within matter, that arrival of meaning within meaningless physical processes. We cannot explain how we became capable of wondering. The wonder feels like it came from elsewhere. Take a breath here. Let these questions rest without demanding answers. Some mysteries resist resolution not because evidence is lacking, but because the questions themselves may be misframed. The Sumerians told stories that satisfied their need for meaning. Those stories still speak, but what they say depends on who is listening. Around 2334 BCE, a man named Sargon rose from obscure origins to forge humanity's first empire. His armies swept northward from the city of Akkad, conquering Sumerian city-states one by one: Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Nippur. The Akkadian language, Semitic in structure and sound, began displacing Sumerian in courts and marketplaces. Within 3 centuries, Sumerian would cease to be anyone's mother tongue. Languages die slowly, then all at once. For generations after Akkadian conquest, scribes continued learning Sumerian as a scholarly and liturgical language, much as medieval European scholars learned Latin long after Rome's fall. Temple rituals preserved ancient hymns. Scribal schools copied old texts alongside new compositions. The great literary works, including the Anunnaki mythologies, passed from Sumerian originals into Akkadian translations and adaptations. The Babylonians, rising to power around 1894 BCE, inherited this bilingual tradition. Their creation epic, Enuma Elish, recast older Sumerian narratives with Marduk, Babylon's patron deity, replacing Enlil as chief among the gods. The Anunnaki remained present, 50 of them marching alongside Marduk in his cosmic victory, but their role shifted from protagonists to supporting cast. Babylonian scribes housed thousands of tablets in temple libraries, systematically organizing human knowledge in categories that would influence library science for millennia. The Assyrians, fierce empire builders of the first millennium BCE, continued the tradition. King Ashurbanipal, ruling from Nineveh between 668 and 627 BCE, assembled perhaps the ancient world's greatest library. Over 30,000 tablets covering literature, medicine, astronomy, divination, and correspondence. His collection included the most complete surviving version of the Gilgamesh Epic, with its flood narrative echoing earlier Sumerian accounts. Then Nineveh fell. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes sacked the Assyrian capital. The library collapsed into rubble, tablets shattering and scattering, buried beneath mud brick debris. Babylonian civilization continued another 7 decades before Persian conquest absorbed it into a new imperial order. Cuneiform script survived through the Persian period, into the age of Alexander, finally falling silent in the 1st century CE. 2,000 years of forgetting followed. The tablets lay beneath tells and desert sands. The languages became indecipherable marks. The stories of Anunnaki and flood and creation, of Inanna's descent and Gilgamesh's wanderings, existed nowhere in living memory. European scholars knew vaguely that ancient civilizations had flourished in Mesopotamia. The Bible mentioned Babylon and Nineveh as great cities of antiquity, but what those civilizations actually thought, believed, and recorded remained utterly inaccessible. This silence holds its own weight. For 20 centuries, the Sumerian understanding of divine beings, human origins, and cosmic order lay dormant. The stories that had shaped ancient Near Eastern consciousness for 3 millennia simply stopped being told. Until shovels broke ground and crates of tablets began arriving in London, Paris, Philadelphia, Berlin. Until scholars bent over clay fragments with magnifying glasses, slowly matching sign to sound, sound to meaning, meaning to narrative. The Anunnaki began to speak again, but what we hear depends on how carefully we listen. In the basement of the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, wooden shelves hold thousands of tablets that no modern scholar has ever read. Cataloged but untranslated, photographed but not interpreted, these clay rectangles contain words waiting to be heard again. The British Museum houses over 130,000 cuneiform tablets, perhaps 30% fully studied. The University of Pennsylvania's collection from Nippur alone numbers over 30,000 pieces, many still yielding fresh insights a century after excavation. The sheer volume overwhelms available expertise. Each untranslated tablet might contain administrative records, grain distributions, livestock counts, worker assignments. Or it might preserve another fragment of lost literature, another piece of mythology, another reference to the Anunnaki and their role in cosmic order. We cannot know until someone reads it. New discoveries continue emerging from both ground and archive. In 2011, scholars announced the translation of a previously unknown tablet, adding 20 lines to the Gilgamesh Epic, passages describing the cedar forest with environmental detail absent from other versions. In 2015, a cuneiform astronomy text revealed Babylonian astronomers using geometric methods to track Jupiter's motion, techniques previously thought to originate in medieval Europe. The tablets keep surprising us. Digital technology accelerates this work. The Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative has photographed and cataloged over 350,000 texts, making them available to researchers worldwide. Machine learning algorithms now assist in reading damaged or fragmentary signs. A graduate student in Tokyo can examine a tablet housed in Istanbul without leaving their desk. The pace of translation, though still slow against the backlog, exceeds anything previous generations could achieve. Meanwhile, the influence of Sumerian thought permeates civilizations that never knew its name. The 7-day week derives from Mesopotamian astronomical tradition. The division of circles into 360 degrees preserves Sumerian base 60 mathematics. Flood, Narratives echoing Ziusudra and Utnapishtim entered biblical tradition through channels scholars still debate. Cultural contact during Babylonian exile, or earlier transmission through Canaanite intermediaries. When Genesis describes God creating humanity from dust and divine breath, echoes of Enki and Nintu shaping workers from clay and godly blood resonate beneath the Hebrew words. The zodiac we still reference, the astronomy that became astrology, the legal codes that shaped jurisprudence, the literary forms that influenced epic poetry, all carry Sumerian fingerprints across 4 millennia of transmission and transformation. Cycles of remembering and forgetting mark human relationship with the past. The Sumerians themselves forgot whoever came before them, compressing that prehistory into myths of divine gift and heavenly origin. Babylonians forgot Sumerian while preserving its literature. Classical civilizations forgot Babylon while inheriting its knowledge. Modern archaeology remembers what centuries of silence erased, reconstructing meaning from broken fragments. Perhaps future generations will forget us too. Perhaps they will rediscover our digital archives with the same wonder we bring to clay tablets, artifacts from a vanished world, evidence that others once lived and wondered and recorded their wondering. The Anunnaki endure in this cycle. Forgotten, then remembered, then reinterpreted for new contexts. Their story continues because humans keep needing stories about where we came from. The tablets rest now in their climate-controlled cases. Philadelphia, London, Baghdad, Berlin, scattered across continents, the clay fragments that once formed a civilization's memory lie quiet in museum basements and research archives. The wedge-shaped marks hold their meaning patiently, waiting for whoever next bends close with careful eyes. They have waited 4,000 years already. They can wait longer, and you rest too, wherever this night finds you. Feel the surface beneath your body. Notice how it holds your weight without effort, how gravity itself becomes a kind of embrace. The same force that shaped the Mesopotamian plain, that pulled rivers through their channels and drew rain from clouds over the Zagros mountains, holds you gently now. You belong to Earth in the most literal sense, your matter borrowed from its substance, your breath drawn from its atmosphere, your story unfolding on its ancient surface. The stars shining overhead tonight are the same stars that shone over Eridu when the first temple rose from marshland. Orion traced his path across winter skies, while Sumerian priests recorded offerings. The Pleiades clustered soft and blue, while scribes pressed reed into wet clay. 5,000 years barely register in stellar time. The constellations have shifted slightly, proper motion nudging stars a few degrees across millennia, but the patterns remain recognizable. The sky that witnessed the Anunnaki's worship witnesses, you're breathing now. What did those ancient beings represent? Gods born from theological imagination, extraterrestrial visitors encoded in mythology, psychological archetypes expressing truths about consciousness and existence? The question can rest unanswered. Some mysteries need not be solved to be honored. Some stories carry meaning precisely because they resist final interpretation. The Sumerians understood something we sometimes forget, that wonder itself holds value. Not wonder as precursor to explanation, but wonder as its own reward. Standing beneath the wheeling stars, watching Venus rise before dawn, feeling the immensity of time and space pressing gently against the small warmth of human awareness. This experience needs no resolution. It needs only attention. Let your thoughts grow quieter now. Let the names and dates and theories settle like sediment drifting to a river bottom. Anunnaki, Eridu, Dilmun, Enki whispering through reed walls. Inanna descending through 7 gates. Ziusudra floating on dark waters while the world dissolved. These images can accompany you into sleep without demanding anything further. They become atmosphere rather than argument, presence rather than puzzle. Your breath continues its own ancient rhythm, in and out, rise and fall. The same rhythm that stirred in the first humans, shaped from clay and divine blood, if the myths speak true. The same rhythm that will continue tomorrow when you wake to whatever the new day offers. Rest now. The questions will keep. The tablets will wait. The stars will wheel overhead in their patient courses, marking time that dwarfs civilizations and outlasts empires. You are part of this immense story, however briefly. Tonight, that is enough. Sleep well. Sleep peacefully. And may whatever gods or forces watch over dreaming humanity watch gently over you.